Whether you agree or not on the all 5 intractable issues, when it comes to Jerusalem, I will put the cross and the crescent and fight you in Jerusalem. Because this is how I perceive Jerusalem as being the heart of Palestine. Not economically, not politically, not socially, but sentimentally. It's our national identity. It's our historic process, which we cannot deny. As a Palestinian, I'm proud to be a Jerusalemite. And if all the attempts fail in bringing justice to Jerusalem, I have the confidence of the resilience of the Jerusalemites, because Jerusalem will never be monopolized by the diktat of power politics and by having one religion monopolizing the others. So here comes a president who is called Trump. I knew Trump because, I go a lot to the United States and I teach at the University of Maryland, so I go shopping. I used to buy his cheap, ties and go to the cheap, casinos that he runs in Atlantic City, which I think he did a very good job by declaring 3 times bankruptcy and coming back. So I will tell him, go back and run your cheap casinos in Atlantic City, because you don't understand the essence of what international relations is all about, let alone you don't understand the complexity and the psychological impact when you talk about one of the thorniest issues, one of the hardest nut to crack, i.e. Jerusalem.
Printing and scanning will be unavailable from 3:50 this afternoon. The Red Materials Room will close at 3:50 and the library will close at 4.
This is the Israeli BICOM sabotage.
Talking about injustice.
So President Trump had decided unequivocally to support the state of Israel by claiming Jerusalem as its eternal capital. I thank Mr. Trump for bringing the Jerusalem issue as the spearhead of the entire Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Because during the last 6 years, we have been lost within what's called the Arab Spring. Thanks to you, Mr. Trump, you brought us back on top of the agenda. And he thinks that he has rendered a favor to Israel. 140 countries have voted against this decision. More and more Israel is being alienated. And today, the current mood in the international relations is, what can we do with Israel as an apartheid state? US has decided to be on the wrong side of history. And US has delegitimized itself as being an honest broker of peace. It exacerbated compulsive violence, and it had broken the rule that third party cannot impose solutions. And we have been preached all the time by the American administrations that there will never be an imposed solutions to our conflict. Here Mr. Trump comes and he imposes solutions. First, by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and of course by moving the embassy, US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And secondly, by defunding UNRWA, he's also removing the question of the right of return, which is as sacred as the issue of Jerusalem for the Palestinians. So my answer to him, and that was on television, go to hell, President Trump. You took off these two from the negotiating table. I would assume that you should take also the table with you. Because there is nothing much that the Americans could do. And as I said, they have predetermined the outcome of Jerusalem by taking such a stand. It is so unfortunate that when I give speeches, I get attacked by some audience or hecklers saying that the United States, having really, and Israel, good relations with that of the Arab world. How come you Palestinians don't appreciate that? I always said in my speeches that the United States relationship to Israel has always been a Catholic marriage, no divorce. Regardless, we know from history that democracies don't fight each other, but sometimes they beg to differ from each other. However, the relationship with the Arab world has always been a relationship of a lover to a mistress with no strings attached. And this is how I perceive that kind of relationship, that is political flirtation, that really fits the national interests of those big powers that are involved in taking this conflict as an excuse and as a facade for their ulterior motives. Why should we always be the victims? And we always use the Palestinians as the victim's victim. Our friends in Israel also, get disappointed when we talk about why Palestinians have to pay the price of racism of Europe against the Jews. Why do we have to be the alternative solution for a people without a land to a land without a people? Why are we attacked when we bring such metaphors in our discussions? Why the Balfour Declaration had to commit itself to a national home for the Jews, while we were the absolute majority, 98% of the population, were referred to as the non-Jewish minority. I told the foreign minister, Mr. Johnson, have the guts and add the word political to the second unfinished symphony of Balfour by saying not only saving or preserving the religious and civil rights, but also the political rights, i.e. the recognition of the state of Palestine. How could it be that we could have real negotiations when we have a top dog, Israel, asymmetrically negotiating with an underdog with an unequivocal support of a third party, i.e. the United States? This is a charade, ladies and gentlemen. We never had real negotiations because negotiations is between two symmetrical powers. That's why we were jockeying to get a recognition of the Palestinian state at the Security Council, because if these 6 intractable issues cannot be solved within the context of asymmetry, I think it will be solved within the context of symmetry without diktat power politics. And if we don't have the issues of justice and inclusion, there will be never a solution to our conflict. It is so unfortunate that this conflict has been handled by the international community through the lenses of crisis management and not through the lenses of conflict resolution. And that's why we did not have enough support to get our way in having our independence. My goodness gracious. What else can the Palestinian people and leadership do when we have given on a golden platter in 1988 78% of historic Palestine without anything in return? We're left with 22, and Israel wants almost 13% of the 22, i.e. the West Bank. And I like the word archipelago, because this is exactly what Daniel has said, the archipelago, because this is exactly what the West Bank looks like today, with the major 3 clusters of settlements, with no geographic contiguity, with east, what we call the E1 envelope of Jerusalem settlements, let alone that Gaza is totally under siege. Nobody talks about Gaza. No, every single issue in Palestine is as important as the other because they are all organically intertwined. We cannot take one issue and forget the other. And this was the major pitfall of the Oslo peace process, because we have accepted the deceit of incrementalism. And I was one of those who criticized Oslo, because incrementalism, as I saw it, was a recipe to disaster. We should have done what the Vatican does. When a pope is dead, the cardinals go into one room, they close their room, and they start negotiating until they come up with a white smoke. This is what we should have done in the peace process, and not the incrementalism where more settlements have been built, where Jerusalem has been Judaized, and where the apartheid wall, I don't call it separation wall, I call it an apartheid wall, for the simple fact that this wall has been built 10 kilometers deep into the West Bank. It was a political statement and not a security statement. Therefore, we have to cling to our, and we say these are not settlements but colonies, and this is an apartheid wall. That's what our rhetoric should be from now on, because Israel has shown to the world that it is a colonial settler movement. It is not a democracy. It is a shame to consider Israel a democracy, because we've heard from Dr. Tibi what democracy is in Israel. It's the oxymoron of an occupier and a democracy for the Jews. And I don't say democracy for the Israelis, because there is no democracy for the Arab citizens so it is democracy for the Jews. Now, to talk about, fantastic, 5 minutes is more than enough for me. To talk about Jerusalem in the peace process, and I came with the intention of talking about this, but after listening to the three distinguished speakers, I had to decide to change all my approach to the issue of Jerusalem. I'm not here to talk about rhetoric, and my speech is not polemical. I'm speaking, as I said, from passion and as a Jerusalemite. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been involved in second-track negotiations after the Oslo Agreement, believing that we could salvage the damages that Oslo had detrimentally, put the Palestinians in such an awkward position. I'm not talking about the Paris Peace Protocol and what other impediments this Oslo Agreement has done to the Palestinian national ethos and its identity and its presence in the occupied territories. But let me talk about the major, formidable challenge that I always had with our Israeli interlocutors, whether at first-track negotiations or second-track negotiations. When we talk about Jerusalem, everybody comes with a maximalist position. And of course, in negotiations, there is no maximalist position, because concessions should be made whether we like it or not. And when we talk about concessions, the first issue that really brings us to deadlock when we start discussing the question of sovereignty. Sovereignty is a non-starter, and I say that from my personal experience. I wrote a piece to the Center of Italian Peace back in 2001, I remember 60 or 70 pages, on what are the models of sovereignty that we could use in the context of negotiations. I came up with several models, which if you Google, maybe you can find that article and you can read it. I started with a scattered sovereignty. I talked about split sovereignty. I talked about shared sovereignty. I talked about joint sovereignty. I talked about unsovereign sovereignty. I talked about God's sovereignty. We did not. I talked about split sovereignty. So we decided to explore all the possibilities when we talk about the issue of sovereignty. But I always said the most problematic in the negotiations over Jerusalem is the 1 square kilometer, which is the old city, which is the walled city, where Israel has nothing there. It's the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Armenian quarter, and it's only what they claim is the Wailing Wall. And most of the properties, and the Jewish quarter, what they claim, it's the Jewish quarter, okay? That's fine. You're not going to disrupt from what I'm going to say. So in terms of area, 90% is owned by the Christians and Muslim Palestinians. So it's only 10%. I would not accept the diktat politics of people who claim Jerusalem as their own to control and monopolize all Jerusalem. This is not. But I believe in the accessibility of the Jews to come and pray. And this was a letter written by President Arafat when he left Camp David. He wrote it to President Clinton that he's willing to give the Wailing Wall adjacent to West Jerusalem, where there will be accessibility for praying. Let me conclude by just saying this. I always say that we are stuck today between the historically inevitable and the politically impossible. There is no way to move forward with such constraints that we have. We have today an outright support of US to Israel. We have a weak Europe. We have a UK that is concerned with its Brexit. We have an Arab world that is totally fractionalized, atomized, factorized. We have a Muslim world that is laid back. So what are our alternatives? Let us not be too harsh on our Palestinian leadership, because pragmatism is choosing between constraints. And the constraints that we have are formidable, but we can do a lot of things. Peaceful resistance, BDS, and telling them, here is the authority. It has been a benign occupation as far as you are concerned. Thank you, Europe, for sustaining this occupation through your own attributes of financing the occupation. And what the Palestinians today want is political independence and not charity from Europe or the international community. Thank you.